Before we get into today's game, I want to talk about the sponsors for my channel. Card Conduit is the best way to sell your unused Magic cards. Whether you've got a box of unsorted bulk, or a complete and alphabetized set, there's a great option for everyone. With a payout averaging 19% better than using any one buy list, and that's after fees are applied, you can rest assured you'll get the best bang for your buck. If you're a skeptic like me, their easy customer service and detailed reports make the whole interaction transparent and safe. And if you use the affiliate link in the description below, or the promo code MTGMUDSTA, you'll save 10% off their fees. And 401 Games, Canada's one-stop shop for trading cards, board games, and hobby supplies. Not to mention an easy-to-use and great online buy list. And if you use the promo code MTGMUDSTA, your first purchase of MTG Sealed and Singles will be 5% off. And Dragon Shield, the strongest sleeves for your strongest deck. So be sure to use the code MUDSTA or the affiliate link down below to save 5% on your next order. Today's patron shoutout goes to Amy. Thanks Amy for supporting me through Patreon. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game has some brand new commanders, most notably with me playing my new Ulalek deck. I keep Hideous Taskmaster, Mountain, Sulphur Springs, Ugin the Ineffable, Command Tower, Eldrazi Ravager, and an Everflowing Chalice. Maximus has become quite the tree hugger with Yedora, keeping 3 forests, Dryad Arbor, Sol Ring, Inox Survivalist, and a Culling Dais. Ian wants to spread the love with his tokens playing Jetmir, and he keeps a Devilish Valet, Forest, Temple of Triumph, Sparseek, Impact Tremors, Mountain, and a Goblin Arnacomancer. And last but not least, new to the channel is Mark, bringing his Malcolm and Breeches deck. He's out to plunder, keeping Big Score, 3 islands, Shared Animosity, Zephyr Singer, and a Command Tower. Maximus wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws and plays a Dryad Arbor. I just play a Mountain. Ian draws, playing a tapped Temple of Triumph, and learns that he has to scry. Mark just plays a Command Tower. Maximus draws and goes straight to combat. He hits Ian for 1 with the Dryad Arbor, and in his second main phase plays a Forest, and then taps it for a Sol Ring. He then taps the Sol Ring for Culling Dais, and passes to me. I just play a Command Tower like Mark did, and pass. Ian draws, and plays a Mountain. He casts Impact Tremors, and passes to Mark. Mark's got an island for turn, and casts an Oaken Siren, and then passes back to Maximus. Maximus has a Forest for his land drop, and has enough to cast Yedora. He then activates Culling Dais to sacrifice the Dryad Arbor, which comes back as a face-down Forest card. Max then uses the untapped Forest to help cast Neverwinter Dryad, and passes to me. My turn is pretty quick, as I play a Forest, and then cast an Everflowing Chalice multi-kicked once, and pass to Ian. Ian's got a Thriving Bluff which comes in tapped, and for the second color he picks green. Mark plays a Mountain for turn after drawing, and he then casts Malcolm, and goes to combat. He swings the Oaken Siren at me for 1, dealing 1, and then gets to make a treasure token from Malcolm's trigger. After that, he passes. Maximus plays a Forest, which isn't a surprise because he's playing mono green, and he goes to combat swinging Yedora and the Dryad at me, and I take 6. Max then casts a Morph creature face down, and I respond by cycling an Eldrazi Ravager, drawing a card. Maximus then continues his turn by casting Aftermath Analyst, and passes. I draw and play an Opal Palace. I then pay a black and a red for a Forerunner of Slaughter, and pass to Ian. Ian drops a Forest, and then pays a red and a green for a Goblin Arnacomancer, and we all take 1 from the Impact Tremors. He follows up with a Devilish Valet, and we take 1 again, and he passes after that. Mark plays an island, and pays 2 for an Izzet Signet. He then casts Breeches, and goes to combat. He swings Malcolm at Ian for 2, and gets to make a treasure token, plus exiles Ian's top card because of Breeches, but can't play it, so he passes. During his end step, Max sacrifices a Morph creature to the Culling Dais, which is an Inox Survivalist that comes back as a Forest. He then megamorphs the Survivalist face up and blows up my ever-flowing Chalice before moving to his turn. Max draws and plays a Crawling Barrens. He then casts a Jetmir War Shaman and manifests his top card. Going to combat, he swings Yedora and the Survivalist at Mark, who takes the hit. With nothing else, Max passes. I draw and don't have enough mana to do much, so I play a Sulphurous Springs and pass to Ian. Ian's turn has him casting Jaheira, doubling the Valet's power and dealing 1 to each of his opponents. He then plays Krenko Tin Street Kingpin, doubling the Valet's power again and dealing 1 more to his opponents from Impact Tremor. Ian then swings the Valet at me for 4 and I take the hit, and with nothing else, Ian passes. Mark draws and plays a Mountain. He goes to combat and swings Breeches at me and Malcolm at Max. Max responds by sacrificing the Survivalist again to the dais and brings it back as a forest and then flips it face up to fight Malcolm and destroy the Impact Tremors, Malcolm then dies, but I still take 3 from Breeches, and he gets to exile an Artisan of Kozilek off the top. Mark then has just enough to cast it, and does so, and passes. Maximus draws and casts a Disguised Creature. He goes to combat, and swings the Manifest and the Neverwinter Dryad at Ian, and Ian blocks the 2-2 with Jaheira, and the Dryad with the Goblin. Before damage, Max sacrifices the Dryad to get a forest, and then has it come back as a forest as well, and the Manifest creature then dies. Max reveals the Manifest was a chalk outline, which comes back as a forest. And once that's done, Max megamorphs the Inox Survivalist again. This time around it fights Jaheira to finish it off, and he gets to blow up the Izzet Signet. The Survivalist then dies, and comes back as a forest again. With nothing else, Max passes. I just play a Reliquary Tower for turn, and cast Ulalek using the Opal Palace, so it comes in with a +1/+1 counter, and then pass to Ian. Ian's got a similarly quick turn, casting a Farseek to find a Plains, and passes. Mark's main phase has him playing an island, and he then casts an Amphin Mutineer, and as it comes in, targets Yedora. Max responds to the targeting by flipping up the Inox Survivalist, and this time fights Breeches, and they trade, with the Survivalist coming back as a forest. With that done, Yedora then gets exiled. Going to combat, Mark swings the Artisan at Max, who sacrifices a Salamander and a face-down forest to the Annihilator triggers. Max then doesn't block, taking 10, and Mark passes turn. Max draws and recasts Yedora. He then goes to combat and swings a Jetmir War Shaman and the Disguised Creature at Ian. Ian just takes the 6, and Max passes. I've got a Tendo Icebridge as my land for turn, and then cast Hideous Taskmaster, and with its ability on the stack, I target Krenko, the Artisan of Kozilek, and Yedora. Before letting the trigger resolve though, Max sacrifices the Aftermath Analyst to the Culling Dais, and then flips up a Print Lifter Ooze to make a 3/3 Ooze, and fights the Artisan of Kozilek. The Ooze trades with the Artisan thanks to Death Touch, and the Ooze itself then dies and comes back as a forest. I then get the rest of the creatures though, and go to combat. I swing the 2 Borrowed Creatures and the Taskmaster at Max, with a total of 3 Annihilator triggers, and he sacrifices 3 forests. Max then blocks the Taskmaster with the Ooze, but takes the rest, and after that, I pass. Ian draws and just plays Boseiju as a land. He then casts Indulge, and he goes to combat. He swings Krenko at Max, and the Devilish Valet at Mark, and he gets to make 3 Goblin tokens and 2 Citizen tokens to attack. This doubles the Valet trigger 5 times, pumping it all the way up to 32. The Citizens are going at me, which I block with my 2 larger creatures, and Mark chumps what he can, but still drops to 1, while Max also takes 3. With nothing else, Ian passes. Mark's got a Mountain for turn, and he then recasts Malcolm, and uses it to help convoke out Zephyr Singer. After that, Mark passes, and Max sacrifices the Culling Dais to draw 4 during Mark's end step. Max plays out a Witch's Oven in his main phase, and then follows up with a Tangled Florahedron, and then a Llanowar Elves. He continues by casting a Nervous Gardener face up, and then goes to combat. He swings Yedora at Ian, but before moving to blocks, Ian uses Swords to Plowshares on it. Max responds by flipping Print Lifter Ooze again, and this time fights my Forerunner of Slaughter. And then sacrifices the Nervous Gardener to the Witch's Oven, having it become a forest and making a food token. He then turns the Gardener face up and has it fight Krenko, and then dies and comes back as a forest, and Max flips it up again to fight Krenko a second time and finish it off. Max then continues using the trick with the Gardener, flipping it face up to fight something and going to find a forest, and uses it to beat up the Goblin or Narcomancer and Ulalek to death, and then lets Yedora finally get exiled, gaining some life. With nothing else, Max passes. I display a Shivan Reef as my land for turn, and then cast Ugin the Ineffable. I then downtick him, destroying the Temur War Shaman, and pass. Ian draws and plays a Circle of Dreams Druid, and passes back to Mark. Mark is pretty stunned that he's still alive at this point, and he plays his own Shivan Reef, and then casts Breeches again. Going to combat, he swings the Zephyr Singer at Ian. Ian takes the hit for 3, and Mark gets a treasure token and exiles Ian's top card, which is an Aura Mutation, which sadly has no targets on the board. Mark then passes, and during his end step, Max flips up the Inox Survivalist, destroying one of Ian's treasures. Max draws and casts the Mending of Dominaria. He mills 2 and gets to return World Shaper to hand, which he then casts in his main phase. Going to combat, he swings the Ooze token at Ian and the Survivalist at Ugin. I chump with a Goblin token, while Ian takes the 6, and after that, Max passes. I draw, upticking Ugin to exile my top card, and make a 2/2 that when it dies, puts the exiled card to my hand. I then cast a Mutated Cultist, which as it enters, I have target the Ooze token to remove all the counters from it, but Max responds beforehand by sacrificing the token to the Witch's Oven to make 2 food tokens. I then cast Drowner of Hope, making 2 Eldrazi Scions from it, and passing to Ian. Ian draws and plays an Ash Barrens, and then casts Hour of Reckoning. With the board getting wiped, the World Shaper dies, so Max gets back all the lands that he put into his graveyard, and then Ian moves to combat. Max flips his Print Lifter Ooze because it was a forest, and he makes another Ooze token before the attacks, and Ian decides to just not attack at this point, and passes to Mark. Mark is perpetually confused that he's still alive, and just recasts Malcolm and passes to Max. Max draws and then mills another 2 from the Mending of Dominaria, and he brings back the World Shaper with it again. He then recasts Yedora, and then plays Weatherlight Completed, and he goes to combat. He swings the Ooze token at Ugin, and I chump 1 damage with the Goblin token, so Ugin only takes 1. With nothing else, Max passes. I've got a Talisman of Curiosity which costs me nothing because of Ugin, and then pay 4 mana for a Dreamstone Hedron. I then uptick Ugin to make another 2/2, and then hard cast a Spawnbed Protector. Moving to my end step, I return the Hideous Taskmaster to hand, and make 2 Eldrazi spawns thanks to the Protector trigger, and I pass to Ian. Ian just draws, plays a Rasta, and passes to Mark. Mark has done his best Drax impression to blend in with the background so no one will perceive him, and he draws and casts a big score in his main phase, which gets Ian a Spider token because of Arasta. Mark then plays a Slippery Scoundrel, and then a Corsair Captain, and he passes to Max. During his end step, Max flips up the Nervous Gardener, going to find a forest to put to hand, plus makes another Ooze token. He then sacrifices the Gardener to the Witch's Oven, making a food, and it comes back as a forest. He then flips it again, making another Ooze, and going to find a forest. Max then sacrifices 2 food tokens, gaining 6 life, and moving to his turn. Max draws and brings back his few lands of the Mending of Dominaria that remain, and then shuffle the rest of his graveyard into his deck. He plays an Arid Archway, and floats a green off his face-down forest, and then bounces it back to hand. Max then casts a Chalk Outline, and he goes to combat. he swings the Ooze tokens and the Nervous Gardener at me. And I trade with the Gardener and chump some of the Ooze damage to take a total of 7. The Gardener dying comes back as a Forest, and he makes a 2/2 Detective token from the Chalk outline, as well as a Clue token. After combat, Max then casts Multani, and then World Shaper again, and passes to me. I draw and recast Ulalek. I then follow up with Hideous Taskmaster, and sacrifice 2 of my Eldrazi Scions to pay for Ulalek's trigger to copy the Hideous Taskmaster and the ability on the stack. With the first trigger, I target Multani, Arasta, and Malcolm, and then a Spider token, Corsair Captain, and Yedora with the second one. With my targets declared, Max responds by sacrificing Multani to the Witch's Oven, and then brings it back as a Forest token, and gets another Detective and a Clue token. But that's not all, flipping up the Nervous Gardener to get a land. The triggers then resolve, and I steal the creatures, and then I uptick Ugin for a 2/2. Going to combat, I swing out at Max, except for Malcolm, which goes at Mark, and the Spider token and Rasta go at Ian. Max has 4 Annihilator triggers, sacrificing 3 lands and the World Shaper, which brings the lands back. Max then throws 2 Detectives in front of Yedora, and blocks the rest of the creatures with his Oozes, but still takes 8. Mark then dies to one of his own commanders, and Ian takes the hit, and sacrifices 2 goblins to the Annihilator triggers. I then move to my end step, and get the Spawn Bed Protector trigger, returning the dead Hideous Taskmaster to hand, and making 2 more Eldrazi spawn tokens. Ian draws and casts Jetmir. He then passes. During his end step, Max cracks a Clue token to draw a card. Max draws and plays a Forest. He then goes to combat and swings the Weatherlight Completed at me, and the rest go at Ian. Ian blocks what he can, but loses most of his board and takes 4, while I take 5 in the air. After combat, Max casts a Squall line, putting 13 to the X, which finishes off the remaining life totals for Ian and I, and he wins the game. Game review time. This game was 1 hour, 33 minutes, and 21 seconds. And a lot of it was because of Maximus, and those flipping up cards, sacrificing them, becoming forests, then flipping them up again. It got really out of hand, as I'm sure you saw, and yeah, that deck was brutal. The most brutal part about this entire game is that I think even with board wipes, as long as Yedora was out, Max was pretty much safe. That Hour of Reckoning from Ian would normally have set a lot of people back, but as you saw, it kind of rammed Max, which is not what you want to do when you're paying that much mana for a board wipe. Other than that, the impact trimmers were good, and I was really surprised how big he was able to get that Devilish Valet, although I was surprised that it went at Mark and not Max. Mark's deck didn't seem that terrifying. I mean, he was playing a lot of pirate cards, which, is exactly what you want to do, but he wasn't getting as much value as I typically see out of it. Hopefully he comes back and gets to try it again, because I feel like we really didn't get to showcase just as powerful Malcolm and Breeches can be. On the flip side, I think Ulalek did pretty well. It's tough to have a commander that costs 5 and then requires 2 additional colorless mana to use in addition to casting another spell, but as you saw, when I had that Hideous Taskmaster and copied it, ooh, things were good. That being said, I have added more colorless sources to the deck to help with that, and increased the amount of lower costing Eldrazi. On average, the hand that I had was basically hovering around 20 converted mana cost total, with each card being on average about 6, which was really high. I was casting maybe 1 spell a turn, which is just not what I wanted to be doing. Ideally, I want to hopefully have a couple things I can have out on the field, so it needs a little bit more tweaking. That being said, it's still fun to play new decks, and I have a Quorum deck coming out pretty soon, as well as an Azlask, which will be a little bit weird and not really Eldrazi focused. Hopefully you're looking forward to that, but otherwise, just remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, but it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.